We're Josh and Carrie Woodcock from Summersville, Missouri. South Central Missouri. We're about an hour and 15 minutes east of Seymour. Can you all hear me okay? My medical records call me C5 quadriplegic since my spinal cord was damaged at the fifth cervical vertebrae. And just to show you some of the functions I have good shoulder movement, I have biceps. I don't have tricep movement. When I put my arm up, I can't straighten it. I have wrist flexors up. I can lift them up, but when I turn my hands, they're kind of stuck this way. I can't move any of my fingers or thumbs individually. Whatever grip I have is just pretty much wrist function. My accident happened in January of 2004. I was attending a Bible school in Seymour, and when I tell my story, it always reminds me of some verses in Isaiah 40, verses 11 to 18, where it kind of describes the might and magnificence of God and how small the universe is in comparison to Him, and yet how He takes care of us, and kind of the way a shepherd does a lamb. My accident happened on a Friday afternoon during activity time during Bible school. One of my cousins was visiting at the time, and we went into town to wash that car, to wash my car. Dad had bought us boys had kind of gotten Dad to buy a car. It was an older BMW, and got a blown head gasket and a cracked head, and me and my brother fixed it up, and that's what I was driving to Bible school. My cousin James, like I said, he was with me on our way back to the Bible school. We got this dumb idea to kind of try the car out a little bit. There was a long hill just outside of town there. It was about a half mile down one side and probably a mile up the other side. Thought we'd just go up there and turn around, and we'll just see what it does from the top of the hill down to the bottom, and we'll slow down going up the other side, what can happen, and going fast for half a mile. So that's what we did. And we got up to about 118 mile an hour, and that rear tire blew out. And I ended up kind of losing control. It went down in the median. It was winter time. It was muddy, and they believe the front end kind of sunk into the ground, or at any rate, it started flipping kind of end for end. I wasn't wearing my seat belt. James was, and I was thrown out of the car. They believe I went out through the passenger's door. James said he felt me sliding across his lap. The passenger's door latch was broken, and the door was kind of wrapped around the front of the car. They assume I broke my neck when I hit the door when I went out there. Anyway, the car landed on its wheels. James came back and found me. I was face down in the mud, and I believe he rolled me over. Just within minutes, people started showing up, stopping in. This was on a 4-lane highway, and one of the first people that stopped was a flight attendant from a Lifeline helicopter. He was on his way to coach a basketball game in another town, and he said he normally stopped at a town beyond the scene of my accident. He'd always stop there and get something to eat. But just for some reason, this time he decided to stop at a town before the scene of my accident, and which put him there right at the scene. He tried doing CPR on me, doing mouth to mouth. He said that my teeth were clenched shut and my eyes were rolled back. You couldn't get any breath into me, and so I knew he needed to do an emergency airway. And about that time, there was another lady showed up. She was a nurse from the pediatrics ICU, and so between them, I think she had a hunting knife in her car, and they used that and took apart a pen, just a ballpoint pen. Took the filler out, used the tube, and he used that hunting knife to make a cut in my throat. And he said this knife seemed really huge. He was used to dealing with a little scalpel, and said it seemed kind of dull. And he was put it against my throat, and he was kind of pushing in there. And he said it wouldn't go. He was afraid if he'd push too hard, it'd go in too deep and leave too big a hole. And he said about that time, another lady walked up, and she said, "I'm a surgeon's assistant." And she said, "If I put just the right tension on the skin, I think it'll work." And so she pulled the skin taut, and he said he was able to make just the perfect little hole. Then they pushed that pen tube, the tapered part, put it in there and shoved it right into my windpipe. And then the flight attendant, breathed through that pen tube right down into my airway to keep me alive. He said he was only able to get about 4 breaths per minute, and my lungs had kind of got beat up in the accident. The one was collapsed, and they were filling up with fluid. He said that the pen tube was filling up with blood. He said he figured I probably only had about 2 breaths left, and he really thought I was dying. He said when the ambulance came into view, and when it got there, they put a breathing tube in me, and got me in the ambulance to stabilize until the helicopter got there. The ambulance crew also, they came in and talked to me afterward, and they said, "Yeah, we were on our way back to our station from another call." Said we were on our way right past the scene of your accident. If we'd have been at our station when we got your call, you'd have never made it. So about a series of miracles right there. They put me on sedation drugs, I guess just because of the trauma of the accident. Put me on a feeding tube, had me on a ventilator. And this happened on a Friday afternoon. I think the following Wednesday was the first day I could remember what they had told me the day before. And I'd wake up, and I couldn't move anything. To start with, I was complete paralyzed from the neck down. I could wiggle my one wrist just a little bit, but I couldn't move anything. And I knew I had been when I wake up, I knew that there had been an accident. I knew James was with me. I knew something was bad wrong. I couldn't move anything. And I'd ask them what happened, and they'd tell me, and I'd drift off, and I'd wake back up, and I knew I was asking the same questions over and over again, and I was afraid I had brain injury. They had put me in traction. Since I had the hole in my throat there, they couldn't do surgery right away. They were afraid if they'd do surgery and put hardware in with an open wound there that there's too high of a probability of getting infection. So they just put me in traction for 2 weeks till that hole could heal up. Sure, most of you know what traction is, but if there's someone that doesn't, they had this C-shaped metal bracket that went over the top of my head and screwed in either side of my temple, and then they hooked 15 pounds of weight to it on a cable and ran it over the head of my bed on a pulley, and then they just kept my neck pulled straight and in place. One of the things that I remember about being in traction was that they'd have to come in every so often and tighten up these bolts, check the tension on them. And it was really gross because when they'd tighten them up, it'd just get just tremendous pressure on my head, and they'd kind of creak there in the bones in my skull. And one time they sent these 2 guys in to tighten them up, and they looked like someone from housekeeping or janitor, they had this rack of random wrenches, looked like off the clearance rack at Harbor Freight or something. And they come in there kind of joking and talking, did not look like medical personnel at all. And they started trying different wrenches on me, and I'm kind of catching on what's happening, and all of a sudden they said, oh, kind of like this one should work, and I'm like, surely I have the right one. Well, they start tensioning it down, and they either had a metric on a standard or standard on a metric, one or the other, but they got it tightened where they wanted it, and then it was stuck, the wrench, they couldn't get it off. I thought, man, I'm a piece of work now. The wrench off my head yet, too. And so I guess they didn't even think, but he started just kind of thumping on the wrench with his palm to knock it loose. And I thought I was going to start walking right there. Another thing about the first little while there being in ICU was being alone and unable to call for help. For a while they had me in a room with glass doors, and I didn't know have a call button. The reason they had done that is because they'd gotten complaints from some of the other families in there. They kind of let us bend the rule of how many people were allowed to be around my bed. There's only allowed to be like 2 or 3 or something, and some of the other families started counting feet sticking out under the curtain, and there was way too many feet for the people that were allowed. And so the chaplain, he was really nice. He said, hey, well, we've got a room just inside the ICU. It's got doors, it's right. People won't see it. If you talk to me at the right time, you can just slip in there and close the doors, and it'll be all right. But there was still times between visiting hours, I don't remember why, but that I had to be all by myself, and I couldn't call for help. Another thing that they'd have to do frequently was the suction the fluid that was building up in my lungs and my airway. Every so often, it'd make it really hard to breathe, and I couldn't move, and my head was tipped back. I was in traction, and it'd start gurgling when I'd try to breathe, and to suction that out of there, they'd take this hose, it looked like it was just really small surgical tubing, and they'd feed it up my nose. They'd stick it up my nose and then down to my airway, and then they'd put suction to it and suction it out. And they weren't always, you had to be real careful how they did it, because it'd come all coiled up, and if you didn't straighten it out right, they'd feed it in wrong. It'd come out into my mouth. And if they weren't watching, they'd put the suction on, and then I was really out of air. They would do that. And you can't even yap for air when you're in traction, So I'd tell them, just if I blink both eyes, pull it out. It's not in the right place. Carrie has a story about one of those times.
So this is one of my favorite stories about Josh when he was in the hospital. One night he was in the ICU room alone, and it was in the room with the glass doors, and he woke up when he could just hardly breathe, and his lungs needed to be suctioned again, and he still wasn't able to push a call button, and he tried calling for help numerous times, but none of the nurses could hear him, and he couldn't call very loud without choking on some of the fluid, and every time a nurse would walk past, he would just feel like he was a little closer to suffocating. And suddenly he could just see himself laying in his hospital bed, and he could see the screws on the side of his head and the traction mechanism, and Josh felt like he was just up in the corner of his room. And as he looked around, he realized that a large hand was holding him, and he could see like the creases in the palm, and he was looking down between big fingers, and he could breathe just fine. And then within a few minutes, he was back in his body on the hospital bed, and a nurse was there ready to suction his lungs, and Josh says he knows without a doubt it was the hand of God.
Some other things I remember a lot was just regret and embarrassment, shame, fear of what people were thinking and saying, knowing it was my own fault. It was just stupidity and just foolishness. I didn't have anyone to blame, having to be fed. You know, I was always afraid people were going to come and visit around mealtime. You know, having to have someone feed me, and if I'd start crying, you know, my tears would go back in my ears, and having to have them wiped. Oh, you know, and after 2 weeks there, they did neck surgery. They fused the C4, 5, and 6 together. They put some donor bone and caging in the front, and then pins in the back. And my surgeon, he was a really good surgeon, but you know, it seemed like somewhere in his medical schooling, he had kind of traded in all his personal skills or people skills for his surgical skills. He was just really, really blunt, you know. And he just came out and told, my sister was actually the only one in the waiting room when he came out and gave my prognosis. My family hadn't made it in yet. We lived 2 hours east of the hospital, and my dad and brothers were logging another hour beyond that. And he came out and just told my sister, you know, and she didn't even know that I was paralyzed. He told her, broke my neck, and you know, basically no chance of me ever walking again. And said that my spinal cord looked like a frayed cable. There's bone chips sticking in it and everything, and which wasn't really the case. There was no bone chips. We kind of thought maybe he had a frayed cable somewhere sometimes, but after my neck surgery, I was able to get up in a wheelchair and start doing therapy. And you know, I just remember the first time being in a wheelchair was just really hard. I remember going out of my room and down the hall the first time and thinking, "Wow, this is really me. I'm really in a wheelchair. I really have to use one." And you know, when I was in the it seemed like reality didn't really sink in when I was just laying in bed. You know, it felt like, you know, like you're really sick or you have a condition or something. But being in a wheelchair is when reality really sunk in. And some of my therapy to start with would be just like trying to feed myself or sit up without fainting. When I was in traction, you know, just laying flat, they couldn't really do any range of motion or I couldn't really do much exercises in there. And I remember when my one therapist, he was really funny, and he had a good way of making me laugh, and he wanted me to start doing bicep curls. It was after a few weeks I started getting a little bit of gross arm movement, just a little bit, and my biceps were the first one that came back, a little bit of shoulder movement in my biceps. My wrists would just hang. I didn't have any wrist function for months. I'd have to wear splints to hold my wrists from just hanging, and to eat, they just stick utensils in my splint. I could kind of eat that way. Someone would have to support my elbow. I couldn't really hold it up. But he was trying different weights on my arm. He tried like a pound, and I couldn't lift that. And then he tried 8 ounces. I couldn't lift that. And he went down to the lightest one that they had, and he said, "Wow, you're curling about 3 paper clips." Now, you know, I was so anxious to go home, yet so afraid of coming around in a wheelchair. And I remember just kind of like fear and near panic the first time I went to a youth function. Of course, when I did get home, my siblings, they wanted me to go to youth functions and stuff, and I just kind of wanted to stay home. I do remember that I really enjoyed going to church, probably more than I ever did before. It's like sitting in church, you know, I didn't feel so different from everyone else. I was kind of like everyone else when I was at church. Everyone was really kind and caring. At church, it just seemed like extended family. I was in the hospital for about 2 months, and then it was 9-10 months, somewhere in there. I went to I did outpatient therapy, and I was kind of the worst one at the therapy place where I was going. Then I spent a month at an inpatient rehab center in Columbia, Missouri, which had a wing specifically for spinal cord injuries. And it was really good for me to be there. There were other guys with worse injuries than mine, and a lot of guys with no family support, and of course no church support. A lot of loners were there. And they looked at me like I kind of had it made. I had people come and visit all the time. And it was 3 hours from home. And people would always come on the weekends, even during the week. My family would make trips up there, or some of the youth guys, my brothers and youth guys would knock off work early and jump in a car, and they'd drive 3 hours up there and be with me for an hour or two and head back home. While I was in Columbia, they kind of helped me get back to driving, and they encouraged me to go back to school and get a degree. And I told them I'm just not an office guy. We had started our own logging business about 9 months before my accident. It's my dad and my one older brother and one younger brother. I have 3 brothers. My youngest one, he was still in school, and Mom wasn't ready to let him go out to the woods yet. I had been kind of the one who was, me and Dad, I was the main one that pushed to start our own business, and so I felt really responsible to get back out there and help them with this thing that was a lot my idea, or that I was help push for. And I told them kind of what I wanted to do. I don't know how familiar you all are with logging. It's done different ways, different parts of the country, but we do it in our area a lot more like they do south and east. We have a machine that goes and cuts the trees down, and skidders drag them up to the loading site. And then we run these knuckle boom loaders that are they have outriggers, and you can pull them out in place with a semi and set them up, and they're just stationary, stay in one place. And they have these hydraulic buck saws where you can cut the trees to length and process them, and delimbers on them. And I was pretty sure I could run that again, stay in one area, and it wasn't like I was driving around the woods or anything. And so they said, well, they knew of another paralyzed guy that had modified an excavator so that he could run it. He had an injury similar to mine, so we went and met him and looked at the modifications he had made to his excavator. And he had this shop-built lift system, and he just made this track, kind of like this telescoping track system that was made out of angle iron or tubing, and is welded into the roof of his excavator, and had a winch on the end, just like a four-wheeler winch. And he'd run that thing out and let the cable down. In the mornings, he'd put this sling in his wheelchair, and he'd just drive up there, get out, and he'd hook that cable up onto this sling and just winch himself up. He'd roll back in and sit down in the factory seat of his excavator. So I went home, and we built one very similar to that. They also helped me get back to driving, helped me get a truck modified with a wheelchair lift in it. And it actually worked fairly well for me to run knuckle boom. My brothers are all pretty good mechanics, especially my older brother. He's real good with hydraulics. They rerouted the hydraulics so it's all hand controls instead of some foot controls. They have switches on the joysticks to operate the buck saw and the delimber. They modified them. Instead of using my thumbs to press the buttons on top of the joysticks, we glued pieces of plexiglass across there that were wider than the joystick handle, so that I could just slide my hand up. Instead of pressing on one side, I just lift on the other side. They even had to put one function on a switch on my elbow. I used that. They made these brackets on the joysticks where I could just set my hands over them, and my hand sets over the joystick, and then there's a pin on either side of my wrist. I think there's pictures in the brochures of that. and then I can just set my hands in there. I can use them to operate them. It took quite a while to figure everything out and to make the hydraulics work. They made it so they could shut my functions off and put it back to factory, so that if I have to quit earlier, or I'm not there, that they don't have to get used to my controls. And I really like. It just seemed like it was really psychologically therapeutic for me to be out there. For one, working with my family again, and I think one of the reasons I like running loaders so much is just getting out of the wheelchair and feeling normal again. When I'm in the machine, it's kind of like doing what I had done before, just in a little bit different way. I didn't feel so paralyzed. Foresters or people that come out to the woods, they couldn't tell I was paralyzed. And I thought, there's probably a lot of other people that are like this in different ways. Other people have hard things to deal with and they look normal, they look fine. And we didn't know what, and we don't know what we don't know what they're dealing with on the inside. Since I've been paralyzed, there's been times and other things that have been just about as hard to deal with as being paralyzed, and it helped me realize, that once again that other people around us are going through really hard things. My difficulties are obvious, but there's a lot of people with difficulties I don't see. People may wonder if one of my biggest regrets was driving so fast, and yeah, sometimes I still wonder. And if I'd been driving a speed limit, if I would have gotten paralyzed. But often when I reflected over my life, probably some of my biggest regrets are similar to other people's as well. Times I got mad at my dad and brothers at work, went against my parents' wishes, set bad examples for my siblings, made God sad and angry, developed bad habits, and looked at garbage that, sometimes still plague me today. Before my accident, I had real purity problems. You'd think after a life-changing event like mine that I would just kind of get over my problems. I didn't. And for a while, it felt like I stayed real close to God. But after a few years, it seemed like I was back into the same things I was before. I'd have some victory and have some defeat, and I'd feel so awful knowing I'd been at death's door, and God had literally pulled me back from the edge of hell and gave me a second chance. I could imagine God just kind of wanting to shake me and say, "Son, what are you thinking?" I did. I pulled you back from hell. I gave you a second chance. And it was during these times that God still did miracles for me. I remember one time I was we were logging back on this conservation property, and it was real steep and hilly, and my first truck had a faulty ECM. We didn't know it at the time. It would idle really low, and it would stall easy. And the guys that modified my truck, they didn't do a real good job. I'm supposed to have backup steering so that if my truck dies, I can hit a button, I still have power steering. But it never worked right. But anyway, coming into the job, we'd go down this real steep hill, and it had a curve in it. It was just a conservation road. Coming out, it was really steep, and coming out, you'd just about lose sight of the tree line. And I'd always have to hit four-wheel drive coming out of there, or else I'd spin out. And sometimes I'd have someone with me. It wasn't a big deal. But this one evening, I was coming out by myself, and I had this electronic gas and brake where you either gas or brake. And I realized when I was halfway up the hill that I didn't put it in four-wheel drive. I knew I was going to spin out, and I was afraid it'd stall. Sure enough, it spun out. I held the brake, but I had to let off the brakes. I couldn't quite reach over to hit the four-wheel drive button. And so when I let off the brake, put it in four-wheel drive, and tried to go again, the truck stalled, and I started rolling backwards. And it wasn't real fast. It felt like I was going 15, maybe 20 mile an hour in reverse. It felt really fast. And I didn't have steering. There was, like I said, there was a curve and kind of a steep bank. And my truck rolled back down over this steep bank, and we were doing a storm cleanup. There was big trees blown down all over and big root wads sticking up. And there was this big tall one. It was probably 8 feet high. And I could see in my mirror it was just lined up, rolling straight at it. And I was just praying, and I knew I was going to hit it. And I told God I couldn't afford an insurance claim yet. I just got back to work. And my truck rolled right down, and all of a sudden it just stopped. That thing came right up. It looked like it was right against my tailgate. And there was no bang, no jerk, nothing. My truck just stopped. I just felt like there was someone around. I looked around to see if there was an angel or something. And started up and went on home. And that evening at supper time, I told my family about it. Next morning, one of my brothers was with me coming into work, and sure enough, you could see the tracks down through the ditch, and it went right up to that big root wad, and there couldn't have been but just inches between it and the back of my truck. Another time, all three of my younger siblings were with me. We're going to another visit one of my cousins in another community, and this was really curvy. There's no good route over there. If you're ever familiar with Farmington, it's between Summersville and Farmington, Missouri, just curvy, hilly, 2-lane roads. One of the first times I was through there. And I thought I was driving careful, but I popped over this hill or around a curb, and there was traffic just stopped right in the road. There was a string of traffic, and there was cars coming the other way. And I knew I couldn't stop quite in time, and the ditch was too steep, oncoming traffic. And I didn't know what to do. I was just braked as hard as I could. And all of it, once the road just cleared out in front of me. And it seemed like I saw lights go past my window. And I looked in my mirror, and there was a string of traffic right behind me instead of in front of me. And everyone was just quiet. I was like, wow, what was that? And nobody said anything for a while. I asked my siblings about it later, and they said, yeah, that's the way it looked to them too. And it seemed like God, just put me in front of that traffic. And it seemed like God was saying, I'm not giving up on you. I did all those miracles at your time of your accident, and I can just keep right on doing them. God won't give up on you either. Don't give up on God. Being part of a church family is a real privilege. I mentioned that was during those times I had some of those purity problems. And part of the reason I didn't get help right away is I was so embarrassed about it. Felt like, I had these near-death experiences, these close calls, these God working in my life, and people have to do so much for me already. Is there not one thing that I can take care of on my own? Can I keep my emotions? Can I not do anything on my own? And I didn't think about it. There was pride at the time, but looking back, I was too proud to ask for help at the time, and I didn't feel fit to be married or ask a girl or anything at the time. Being paralyzed, I just thought that part of my life is just gone. And when it seemed like I couldn't, when I kept going having these purity problems, I thought for sure never. I'm at enough of a disadvantage the way it is. If I try getting married that way, I'm for sure beyond redemption if I have a struggle like that. But, if you're dealing with something, don't make the same mistakes I did. Don't let Satan prevent you from getting help. Our church people care about us more than we often realize. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 is a pretty simple verse, praying without ceasing. I think part of that is just talking to God, just having kind of an open dialogue with God and just communicating Him through a day, not just formal prayers. Just getting into the habit of talking to God and telling Him everything. When you're really frustrated or discouraged, you need someone to talk to. If you can go on a walk or a drive and just talk to God like you would to maybe a friend or a parent or someone close. There's something that I've found for me about voicing troubles and putting them into words. Just helps me kind of sort through things a lot better. Things can just kind of get balled up in our minds, and one thing adds to another, and pretty soon life looks overwhelming. But if I can hear myself saying what's bothering me, it helps me sort through them. And often, sometimes it seems kind of silly and menial, and not quite so serious. One of the great things about talking to God is He listens all the way to the end. He doesn't just butt in and defend the other side. He keeps a secret. He won't twist what you say or spread it around to other people. Just make God our best friend, trying to thank Him for the bad things too, even though it's often kind of hard. I was listening to some speaker one time, and he talked about that. He said, try thanking God for the bad things in your life. And I was at work. I was running loader. I was listening to him out there in the woods, and I told God, I said, man, I'm not going to lie to you. I just can't. I appreciate what you did for me, giving me a second chance for all the miracles you've done, keeping me alive, the family, the church, all the good things I have, my job, but I'm just not thankful for being in a wheelchair. I hate being paralyzed. I hate being different. It seemed like God just kind of started working on me. God has such a kind way of helping us get used to new ideas and different ways of thinking. And it seemed like He started just kind of showing me the trend that I was on and how my life could have gone, where I could have been if I hadn't gotten paralyzed. I probably would have gotten married. I probably would have never gotten to the place of having victory. I could have been a disaster of a husband and a father. I love the song "Mercy's Free." There's a couple phrases in it that describes what God did for me at my accident really well. It said, "Did Christ, when I was sin pursuing, pity me, pity me? Did He snatch my soul from ruin? Can it be, can it be?" I also like the chorus of the one version of "Reach Out to Jesus." It says, "Reach out to Jesus, with love He's reaching out to you. He's so sympathetic, understanding, kind, and true. His touch will heal you, His love will really make you whole. But why not reach out to Jesus and He will satisfy your soul?" He may not heal all our ailments and sicknesses, but He can heal the holes in our hearts and the feelings of sadness and discouragement. Now, there's victory in staying close to God. For me, one way is just listening to the Bible. I've done that a lot, just listening to it. And like I said, just keeping an open dialogue with God, it kind of helps just to tell God where I'm going, what I'm doing throughout the day. And I guess it kind of just seems to make His presence seem more real and personal. And I've also found, since being married too, going places, it seemed like often whenever I go somewhere, and for sure when we go somewhere, we just always kind of tell God where we're going and pray about the evening or the day or whatever we're doing. It seems like it kind of gives a little bit of a sense of security and comfort to whatever we may be facing. Carrie's going to tell kind of about how we met.
Hi everyone, I'm Carrie Woodcock and I used to be Carrie Mishler, and I was originally from Seymour, Missouri, which is about an hour from where we live now in Summersville. And I met Josh when he came to speak at a Bible school I was attending. I shouldn't say I met him because I never actually talked to him there. I was too scared to. He seemed like this really popular person with a lot of other people around him after the service. So it wasn't until later that I actually got to talk to him and to meet him. I was teaching school at the time at home in Seymour, and I'd gotten a break to go to Bible school with my two sisters, and I really didn't want to go that year, but somehow they persuaded me to go with them. And I didn't really know Josh at all, besides that I knew he was in a wheelchair from a bad car accident. And I remember discussing him with some of my friends before he came to give his talk. And what I don't remember was what one of my friends reminded me after we started dating. She says that I mentioned to her that I thought he was kind of cute. So anyway, the first time I actually talked to Josh was when his dad had broken his hip, and he was in the hospital, and my family went to visit his dad because my parents knew his parents. Also, the hospital wasn't very far from where we lived. And Josh happened to be in there when we visited. And while we were at the hospital, my mom invited Josh over for supper if he was ever going through Seymour. And he said he actually did when he went to Springfield for wound care. And he was driving in about every other week back then. So my mom just kept inviting him for supper. And my family and I became well acquainted with him and started to really like him. And he just became a good family friend. And his story was so good that I got him to talk to my students, and they loved it. And then I invited his youth group over for volleyball. And then my younger siblings started to go to the doctor with him. And I liked him, but I thought, he's just a good friend. And then one day my friend Melissa asked me, what are you going to tell him when he asks you on a date? And I was floored. He's not going to, I sputtered. But I thought and prayed about it, and what would I say if he did? Did he have the qualities that I was looking for in a husband? Is it so important that if he can walk? Is he godly? How will he treat me? And one thing I did know was that I would rather have someone who would treat me well and not be able to walk than someone who could walk perfectly well and might treat me like trash. And about a month later, Josh asked to court me. And he had talked to my parents before, and then he made sure it was also okay with all my siblings. And we started dating, and we had so much fun. It wasn't without its worries and bumps, though. I wasn't used to always checking ahead of time to see if the places we planned to go were wheelchair accessible or had ramps or were paved. And Josh has an interesting story to tell about a policeman that helped us one time.
So, one weekend, Carrie had been over in our community for Friday night. Saturday morning, we were going on a date. Left fairly early. And it was coming up to an intersection. It's about 7 o'clock in the morning. And my low oil light came on in my truck. And right across the intersection, there was a state trooper sitting there. And so I just pulled across and drove around on his passenger side and rolled down my window. And he I said, hey, one of you check oil in my truck for me. My light just came on. And I said, I'm in a wheelchair in here. And I didn't know if he really believed me. He started giving me this thing. He said, oh, it's liability. We're not even allowed to change tires or anything. I can't do that. I said, all right. Can you at least show my girlfriend where the dipstick is? And he perks up and looks over, and she leaned forward, and she got out and started walking around. When he saw her, he's all attention. He gets out, and then I had to run the doors out on my truck so he could pop the hood. And then he could see that I really was in a wheelchair. And he told her, oh, well, you'll get your clothes dirty, if you do that. And so he pops the hood, and he reaches in and checks it 3 times, and it was a quart low. I said, I got another quart in the back of my truck. And he looked, and it was kind of dirty from riding around back there. I'd been using it for work. And he said, well, you'll get your hands dirty using that. And he didn't want to get his own dirty. He said, I know the guy up the road, the service shop up the road. I'll just call him and see if he'll open up early. And so he gets out his cell phone and calls him up. Sure enough, the guy answered. And so he gets in his car and escorts us up there get a quart of oil. So he got a clean quart of oil and added that for us and got us on the way. And thought, man, I'm going to take her everywhere.
I taught another year of school, and then we got married on August 15th, 2020, in the middle of COVID. Missouri wasn't too strict on COVID regulations, so we were privileged to have about 600 people at our wedding. For our honeymoon, we drove 1,000 miles to Nevada, and I was kind of scared as we had never gone that far by ourselves before, but I know God worked everything out perfectly because all went well, and we were able to go on an antelope hunt where Josh shot a big antelope. And the first year of marriage was fairly smooth sailing, but the second year we hit with a bump. I had to have knee surgery to fix a torn ACL and meniscus. 3 years before that, I had injured my knee playing soccer with my students, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And my kneecap kept popping out, and I'd have to push it back in. And so I finally had to have surgery, and Josh and I were both in wheelchairs for a while. For about a month, his brothers came to help him, and my mom and sisters would come and help me. And to be honest, it was good for my pride to have people to come help us, and also for me to experience life in a wheelchair for a while. When we went out, I was able to use crutches, so I would be on my crutches, and Josh would be in his wheelchair, and I'm sure we looked hilarious. So then 6 months later, Josh had surgery to remove some infected tailbone, but it left a hole big enough to set a pop can in, and the hospital sent us home with a PICC line for IV antibiotics and wound vac. And thankfully, Josh had a standing chair, as he couldn't sit down very long. And he had a setback last year when bone chips started working their way up to the surface, and we're not sure why, but thankfully they stopped. And I enjoy wound care normally, but that part was not fun. He's also had issues with blisters and sores on his feet, so he has to be careful when he's in his standing chair not to stand too long. And he's really close to getting his wounds being completely healed, so hopefully this summer he can go back to work in the woods. But in all these hard things, God has been there, and He's been very good.
Sometimes people, they wonder, how things are going. And, probably the things that make a relationship peaceful or stressful are similar, whether it's able-bodied people or whether there's a disability involved. Even though a disability can often make stressful situations more acute. But just a few things that I've found that that can help with some of those, just being willing to help and do what I can. I can clean the bathroom. I can clean toilets. I figured out I can mop the floors. She has one of those mops that has a squirt bottle on it. I just use it backwards, upside down, so the lever's sticking up. I can push it with the other hand. Just use a lanyard, put around it so I can tie it to my wrist. I can go around backwards, mopping the floor. Just doing little things, helping make the bed in the morning, clearing the table, just being considerate of our differences and appreciating them. One little example is when we were dating, we got talking about being a morning person or an evening person. She said she's not a morning person, and I definitely am. I thought, oh boy, how's that going to work? 'Cause you got to get up early if you're a logger. And it's been a real blessing. In the evenings, after I do my routine in the evenings, and after a shower, when I lay down, man, I can't stay awake. She would be doing wound care, and we're talking. Pretty soon I'm saying dumb stuff, not making sense, and I'll wake up a while later, and she's there listening to some inspirational music and finishing up the wound care, and I thought, man, what if she was like me? Being thankful, saying thank you for everything she does for me, which is more than I could tell you about in one evening. When we have to talk about things that are less than ideal, try starting and ending in a positive or hopeful way. when something's frustrating or bothering me, Carrie can usually tell. It's always good to be reassuring that it's not something about her. And often when I apologize and feel bad for how long everything takes in the evening, Carrie will remind me that she likes helping me and it gives us more time together that we might not otherwise have.
So when we started dating, we discussed the probability of us not being able to have children. We both love children, but I think that was harder for me to accept. So 3 years went by, and we prayed every day for children of our own. And one day, Josh startled me by praying, "Lord, if it's okay if you decide not to ever give us children." And then from then on, we changed our prayers to, "Lord, just fill the void we have for children, whether that's through adoption, foster care, babysitting, whatever." And it felt like we weren't demanding of God anymore, just surrendering. And we decided to look into adoption. And I contacted one of my friends about an agency they had gone through. And not even a week later, we found out on my birthday that I was pregnant. And it was the best birthday gift ever. And we feel so privileged and blessed that God chose to give us our very own child. And we are so excited to welcome our baby into the world in November. And we also feel like it was another answer to prayer, that I haven't faced much morning sickness, just some fatigue, and it hasn't affected me being able to help Josh.
Carrie mentioned about my surgery the last about year and a half, a little over a year and a half ago, and some of the issues with that, using a standing chair. Obviously, I couldn't drive my truck in that time, so we borrow or rent vans when we had to go on trips, and that standing chair will lay down, so she would drive me around a lot. This is actually driving my truck again. This is the first time I've driven on a long trip this far. I've just gotten back to where I can drive around local, and it seemed like kind of a step of faith to come out here before my wounds are all healed up after all the work she's put into them. But like a year ago, last spring, she mentioned that I was getting sores on my feet from standing too much. I made the standing desk down at our shop is just down the road. I do all the bookwork for our business, and so I made a desk I could stand at our house and at the shop, and I'd go down there part of the time at home. And anyway, went on this, and I got to where I couldn't stand very much. I had to lay down a lot, and but anyway, we had to go on a trip and talk at a few places, and I had to stand to do it, and I'd already rescheduled them because of my surgery once, and I couldn't reschedule it again. I thought I'd be healed, but I wasn't, and just seemed crazy, insane to go ahead and do it, but I just told God that, you're just going to have to take care of my sores while we're out there. And, if I'd try standing without laying down, every half hour, my sores on my feet would get a lot worse. We went out on that trip, and I could stand and talk for an hour and a half at a time, and I'd get home, and my feet were fine. My wounds are fine. And if I'd try that at home, they'd be worse than ever. Same thing coming out here. I was just worried by the time I got out here. I drove out here, but my wounds have been fine. They feel better now being up here than it does being up for 4 hours at home. It seems like God's real, and He just stays with us when we need Him. Another thing is just committing our fears and things to God. Especially with Carrie being pregnant now and the baby, and I get more worried about her than I do about the baby and Elf. And just since we've been married, I think if something would happen to her, how would life be? And just being able to commit things to God and realize that my life is God's. My wife is God's. Carrie belongs to Him, and just where it's not mine anyway. Seems like it makes it a lot easier to just be calm and to enjoy life and just be happy. And I really appreciate all the things we've heard this weekend. It seems like, ever since we got married, or even before, it seemed like the scales has always been like this, like I can be the nicest, kindest, most affirming, supportive, understanding husband, and it's just doesn't come close to what she does for me all the time, but it seems like it's the effort that counts more than what's actually done, is what it seems like I've found. I was going to show you how to manipulate it, how I manipulate a few daily objects. If you want me to stop and quit right now, I will. If you want to see them, I'll show them. I see the time's here to stop. I don't know who tells me to go ahead. Okay. So start with this here is the pen tube and the knife that they use to make the airway in my throat. I guess I could have showed you while I was talking about it. If someone wants to inspect my words for truth, the pen tube still has dried blood in it. So anyway, for using a computer to do book work, I can't use a regular mouse very well, so I use a laptop, and just with a scroll pad, I can just kind of use my little finger and scroll on. That works really well. And for typing, I just use a pen that has a grippy rubber on the bottom. And I figured out that if when I curl my wrist up, my thumb kind of pushes my index finger over against the other one. If I hold a pen between my fingers upside down, I can peck type, and it works pretty good that way. I also use voice command a lot. Voice typing has come a long ways. For using a glass to drink out of, the same way, I just curl my wrist up, and I can hold a glass pretty well. Tapered ones work even better. Coffee mugs. I just use my thumb. I curl my wrist up again. I just use my thumb to hold the coffee mug. It works if the loop isn't too big, like this one. There you go. And I can just hold it that way. The feeling in my hands is kind of split. And on the outsides of the bottom side of my arm, the outsides of my hands, I don't have normal feeling. So I have to be real careful not to burn them. For eating, I do the same thing. Just put my silverware between my index finger and my second finger, and I can hold a spoon pretty well. I can't have to chase my food around a little bit sometimes, but it works pretty well. This here, this splint is called a tenodesa splint, and basically tenodesa is just grip off of it's just off your wrist action. I use this for small objects or personal care. Use it quite a bit, and I'll show you how it works. So it just holds my my thumb and my index finger stationary, and when I let my wrist down, they open up, and when I curl my wrist up, it pinches together. So I use this every day. And my truck keys, you can kind of see that they made the key kind of L-shaped. It's pretty basic. It's just a piece of plumber's tape, folded in half and bolted on there. But when the key is in the ignition, that thing sticks down like a lever, and I can I just drape my keys across my hand with the key pointing in, and the remote's over the back of my hand. I can just shove it into the ignition, and I just use my wrist and I pull on the lever to start the truck. And to pull them out, I hook my finger through the key ring, and I can pull them out that way. My truck's out there. I left it open in case you want to look at it when you leave. But Carrie's got a poem to read yet, and then we'll be done.
Josh wrote this poem. It's called Pray Without Ceasing. In darkest hours of deep despair, and when you're burdened down with care, when family's gone and friends are far, when God seems out beyond a star, when death has taken loved ones dear, when all you seem to feel is fear, when all your dreams have crashed and burned and people seem so unconcerned, Jesus says, don't cease to pray. I've been right with you all the way. I love you far more than you know, and I've gone through the things you go. I died for you upon that cross. My friends ran off, I felt such loss. It brings me pain when you are sad. Please let me be your second dad. If young or old, at work or play, I always hear the things you say. Whenever something steals your peace, please tell me and never cease. Keep calling out, keep holding on. Just talk to me as you walk on.